Hello, everyone, and to our favorite shrimp. So on the recent Montagem veto, I was looking through the comments, and this one really stood out to me from Karcher. And Karcher is generally considered to be a relatively farm-oriented mapper, and so this was a comment that really stood out to me as being unexpected, coming from somebody who some would put in the same sort of category as the mappers that were on this vetoed map set. So Karcher says, "I'm also a mapper." And Karcher, to be fair, is also a very high-ranked player. Look at his profile. Um, and, former OSU champion, rank 71. So he knows what the heck he's talking about. He's definitely a high-ranked player and a fairly popular mapper as well. So I'm also a mapper, but as a player, I'm not that happy to see these styles of maps get ranked consistently way too much, because if they are consistently ranked, especially in the case of new players, they will only play certain skill sets over and over again just for PP, like sharp angled jump. New players don't properly know how this game works, and just could think PP is the only way to compare to others. So they just follow what the PP system says. This is quote unquote the easiest map compared to maps which give similar PP to just play it. These maps can make a lot of new players become one-trick players, and it has a negative impact on enjoying different styles of songs and maps. This lets players just seek only new sharp angle jump maps like zombies, because that's the only thing that they can play, and everyone simply would agree it is not a good way for the whole OSU community. So I think that's the biggest thing old generation BNs and Nats were wary of in the past. Anyways, we can't stop the flow of these maps getting ranked anymore, even if they're obviously abused. So I think that BNs and Nats were allowing them as a middle ground, but at this time I personally think that it went too much, or went a little too far. Does the set really need this many difficulties with 0 unique patterns between most of the GDs? I don't know how you all think about this, but looking at the rank section gets ruined, or looking at the rank section getting ruined feels really sad. So, obviously, I'm sort of compensating for the fact that he's a non-native English speaker there a little bit, so I didn't read it exactly word for word. But I think the sentiment here was really interesting, and it's actually something that I have personally known to be the case for a while, where, when we have maps sort of become the standard, you have since probably 2016, you have Monstrata, you have Sotarks, and then this kind of generic aim farm becoming sort of the standard for what gives a high amount of PP and is very easy. When you're a newer player, starting and you're working your way up through normal difficulties, hard difficulties, into insane difficulties, you oftentimes find yourself playing the kinds of maps that rank you up quickly, right? That's the high dopamine hit. From the mapper side, mappers like to map stuff that gets high play count. And so the things that players want, which is the dopamine hit of getting more PP, is the stuff that mappers are then going to inherently gravitate towards mapping because they get more play count. So it, in some ways, sort of feeds into each other. But then there's also the fact that, you have all these newer players getting into the game, particularly in the COVID era, right? You think about 2020, 2021, a huge influx of players because of COVID, and all of them were playing these sort of generic PP aim farm, right? And this was sort of the, you think about sort of end of 2020. I made a video on it, actually, recently with the veto drama on how there was sort of it got so bad, the PP mapping, that 5 BNs got kicked, right? It was like a very big paradigm shift in the end of 2020 because it got so bad. And you have all these people that were starting the game in that era, playing these maps and sort of viewing this as the standard, right? This is what gets me a high amount of PP. And those players generally if they continue playing those kinds of maps, they end up, like Karcher says, kind of one tricks, right? You become really good at aim and not good at reading skills. You don't get good at rhythm interpretation. You don't get good at finger control or high BPM, like stream or speed, or, you know, you may even remember, yourself, if you think about your past, did you ever find AR8 hard to read? For a lot of you watching this, that may be the case where you, at one point, maybe even now, find AR8 hard or uncomfortable to read. And that's not because AR8 is harder. It is because you become so conditioned to higher AR gameplay that was popularized by the fact that in the 2016 to 2022 sort of era of farm, that was the sort of the gold standard. It isn't inherently more comfortable or easy to read higher AR necessarily, depending on the map design, of course. But it's something that once you become sort of accustomed to one way of playing the game, it becomes very difficult to appreciate other gameplay styles, unless you're playing those gameplay styles. And some people are certainly out there playing AR8, AR7. They're playing weirder maps, right? Those people exist. But when we're talking about the community as a whole, I think that there is a huge amount of maps that got very, very popular, as you have seen by the, most popular played maps. They're all sort of the generic PP farm, Sotarks, Meta, so on and so forth. Those are what's getting a lot of plays. It's being reinforced, and we're ending up in a scenario where huge portions of the community just fundamentally cannot play anything that isn't that to the same level that they can play those kinds of maps, right? You think about all the people who can play a 6-star PP aim farm, but they struggle with any kind of abnormal 5-star, right? And that's just kind of sad. And obviously I'm using star ratings there for just sort of visualization purposes. There's a lot of other factors that are not necessarily always properly accounted for in star ratings. But then we end up in a situation where, mappers are being incentivized to map a certain way. Players are being incentivized to play in a certain way because that's what most maps are. We end up in the self-reinforcing cycle of maps just sort of becoming as brain dead as possible to some degree, right? They become as manufactured as possible instead of trying to be creative or interesting or unique. And I think that's a sad thing personally. Obviously, Karcher agrees, which I thought was really interesting because he does sort of make a little bit more of a generic style of map. But anyway, I'm curious what you guys think, because I thought this was a fairly interesting point, and I've definitely talked to other people, including newer players, who have seen a similar thing happen. I know it happened with me when I started in 2020. I started the game in 2020, and this was like peak Sotarks and Monstrata era, and a lot of the maps I played were Sotarks, Monstrata, Snow Nino, Broviich, Armin, and these were the kinds of maps that I found comfortable at the time. And it took me a long time to be able to learn how to read AR8 to a comfortable level. It took me a long time to be able to do wide-angle jumps. It took me a long time to play doubles, right? I still find doubles a little bit uncomfortable, and that's just because I've played way less of them. And people generally avoid doubles or awkward rhythm because the community is, as a whole, very unaccustomed to anything that's awkward, anything that's abnormal. And doubles and triples, in the 4-star, like if you're just getting into 4 stars, you're going to struggle really hard with doubles in particular. Triples as well. You might struggle with streams. You might struggle with when you're just getting into those skills because they're not well integrated. They're not well practiced in most maps, particularly in the hard difficulty range, in the low insane range. And there's a lot of high SR maps that don't really leverage these kinds of skills. They just kind of pander to the lowest common denominator. So I don't really have a point to this video. There's not really anything that can be done anymore. It sort of is a culmination of the way the PP system was designed back in the day that encouraged the types of maps that people played, which then encouraged and reinforced what the mappers were mapping, because the mappers that were mapping it want to have the high play counts of what people are looking for, and the people are looking for what gives them the highest PP. So you kind of ended up with this self-reinforcing cycle. It took a very long time for that to, sort of get fixed, and even then, I don't know if it's entirely fixed either. And, then you end up in a scenario where people have such a high amount of skill in one area that even if the PP system starts to underweight that to some degree, they're going to be so much better at that one skill that they're still going to be outperforming in terms of PP what they might get on a equally hard map that uses a slightly different skill, right? If you're really, really good and well practiced at aim, maybe the speed maps are overweighted, but you're not going to go necessarily play a speed map because you're so much better at aim that you can play a much higher difficulty aim map than a relatively easier stream map that would give you a similar amount of performance points. So, yeah, again, I don't really have much of a point to this, but I thought it was an interesting sort of thing to think about, that this was not necessarily a given that we ended up in this scenario, and it really is sort of a culmination of so many different factors, like COVID, like the PP system, and so on, that really led to this scenario where we have so many of these sort of aim maps getting mapped in exactly the same way. A lot of them, right? The sort of the factory made aim maps that are kind of brain dead, or kind of brainless. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts, I guess, and maybe if you have solutions, I'm happy to hear them, because it's kind of depressing. But yeah, it's not as simple as that. See ya.